Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Nowhere does this adage apply more than to human health. Yet, allopathic medicine has divided the human body into individual parts, which are then addressed by specialists. In so doing, have we missed something that can only be found by addressing the human as a whole? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to explore the holistic view of health consciousness is Dr. Anu ARASU. Dr. ARASU is the founder of London Bioidentical Hormones. Prior to training with the Institute for Functional Medicine and the British Society of Ecological Medicine, she attained a membership into the Royal College of General Practitioners and Royal College of Physicians. Dr. ARASU holds diplomas in child health, obstetrics, gynecology, sexual and reproductive health. Her website, londonbioidenticalhormones.com. Dr. ARASU, thank you for coming on the show with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're quite a ways away from us here, aren't you? Where are you? You're in
UK, yes, quite a way.
Yeah, across the pond, they say, right?
Yes.
So let's start with the basics. What is functional medicine?
Functional medicine is a whole paradigm shift, I would say, that involves looking at the science and actually applying this to what is health. We're in this state now whereby our healthcare system has been reactive. It's been all about treatment of disorder and disease. And functional medicine is actually looking at health, which is way more than the absence of disease. But in order to do that, we do need to identify the dysfunctions and imbalances that can happen before disease happens. So really, functional medicine is a way of bringing together the science to identify those dysfunctions and imbalances and correct them before we end up on that treadmill to disease.
So how, given that, most of our instrumentation and everything else is set up to find disease, and sometimes it's with varying results. What do you do? How do you find the imbalance before it becomes disease?
It's a great question. I think that it actually involves us really going back to normal physiology and the biochemistry and recognizing how clever the body is. So, if you just take any condition like diabetes, before we get diabetes, we can have prediabetes. Before we have prediabetes, we may already have impaired glucose tolerance. We may already not be handling sugar that well. We may already be starting to get inflamed and having higher than normal blood sugars even before we end up with a diagnosis. And I think so many people feel lost because they don't feel great. They're getting a bunch of symptoms and then they go to their doctor and they're told, well, great, you don't have diabetes, nothing for you to do. And they know their body's changed. They know that the way they're feeling has changed, but they feel really helpless. And I think it's because they haven't, understood. They haven't been shown, well, actually, this is what's going on. This is what you can do about it. So sometimes the advice can feel a bit glib. Things like eat less, move more. It just feels glib unless you really go into what does that actually mean for someone. If you show someone, hey, here's your glucose spiking after you just ate that for breakfast. Here are your inflammatory markers. Here is the fact that you're not sleeping or you're doing night shifts. That's all having an impact. If you show what's relevant to that person, then suddenly lifestyle advice goes from being kind of glib and hollow to incredibly detailed. And the difference it makes is that it empowers people.
So the normal approach is waiting till it's broken and then fixing it, right? And the approach you're suggesting with the functional medicine is to keep track before it breaks. With that in mind, and let's keep diabetes as an example, what's your take on the little home units that you can purchase and test your own blood sugar level?
I think they're fantastic. I mean, continuous blood glucose monitors, can be great. One piece of advice I would give is that it's not just about the data, but it's about the interpretation of the data. And I really do believe that it should be used as kind of a path to greater awareness. So the idea is that if you're collecting data and you're really monitoring that with, obviously what you're doing, what you're eating, how you're feeling, you're keeping a symptom diary, and then you're tracking it with the data and you're trying to make sense of what that data means for you. That's the way to look at it. Because data per se is, it's quantum. There's a lot of it and it can mean many different things. And this is going to be the world that we're entering. So I think that really we want to be quite sophisticated in what our aim is, and it is greater body awareness.
So shy of spending our life in the lab getting our blood drawn, because isn't that kind of a snapshot? When they look at your blood, isn't that what it's doing in the moment, but not necessarily overall?
It's definitely a snapshot. It can still be very useful. So I think that we can see patterns, and again, it's about how we interpret that information. So sometimes it can be a wake up call. That's one thing I've heard people say. I think so often people could just come back and say, thank you. No one's ever explained that, or I've never understood that about my body. And it's crazy because we learn more about a car or a washing machine than we do about our own bodies.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? So, if a person's keeping a diary,
Yeah.
what instrumentation would you suggest they have on hand to keep from living in the lab? So we mentioned the blood glucose tester. Would say, for instance, one of those O2 testers be useful?
I think that wearables are a really exciting field. So, for example, heart rate variability, which is a measure of our autonomic nervous system, is something that you can now get done. You can use an Aura ring, you can use, there are many sort of devices that can measure your heart rate variability. It's a really simple parameter. Our autonomic nervous system is the balance between our sympathetic nervous system, which is kind of the one when we're activated, stressed, and parasympathetic, the rest and digest. So imagine sympathetic fight and flight, parasympathetic rest and digest. The balance between the two, the flexibility between the two. We have actually found that heart rate variability, having a good variability, is associated with excellent health. If we lose that flexibility, that is actually associated with many diseases. So simple parameters like that can kind of already give you a clue. And I would actually go one step further and say, for example, I've had cases of people who have felt anxious. And it would be so easy to write that off and say, okay, listen to a meditation app if you feel anxious and you'll feel better. But actually, they tracked their heart rate variability and they had something cardiac going on. This is very, very interesting because what it tells us is just that we should dig deeper, keep questioning, keep asking, keep looking for the cause, because sometimes the anxiety is actually it's like a letter with information in it, and it's just begging to be read and said, let's look deeper. What is actually going on?
Can a person start having anxiety because there's something going wrong in the body that they're not aware of?
For sure. For sure. I mean,
So, like the thyroid, or what all would cause the anxiety physically?
yeah, well, I think we've now quite happily established, this the kind of the physical and the psychological are so interlinked and bi-directional. Um, luckily now that seems to be more and more recognized. One of the big things that will happen, I think is happening, is the understanding of metabolic health on mental health. So basically, if you're inflamed, if your stress hormones and your sex hormones are all out of whack, that's going to affect your neurotransmitters, and that's going to affect your mental health, whether that be anxiety, depression, or a whole host of other mental health issues. So metabolic health would be my answer to that. Yeah, it's a great place it's a big term, but it's a great place to start looking at, hormones, sugars, that kind of thing.
So the wearable
Yeah.
monitors, like the wristwatches, how reliable are those? Where's your stance on those?
Yeah, it's a good question. They are reliable enough to, I mean, it depends what we're comparing it to. I think they've been reliable enough to alert people to things that they would otherwise not have picked up, to make associations. Again, for something to be medical grade, that's another level. So we're actually entering this whole world of technology where all of the questions you're answering are going to become more and more relevant. And in time, I think things will be classified and categorized, and medical grade devices will have one place. But I think where we're at now for people, just learning about your body, wearables, perhaps, clearly if you've got symptoms, going and proactively looking at getting them tested and then deciding which route to take. Because sometimes I notice that people are almost afraid to go to the doctor because they are so used to being given a diagnosis and a treatment. Rather than just staying at the level of understanding, saying, okay, well, this is the symptom you have, let's understand what's going on. And it might be that the path to the treatment is one of many options. It might be lifestyle change, it might be nutrition, it might be supplements, it might be hormones, it might be medication, it might be something else. But I think just staying at that level of first understanding and trying to get to the root cause would be a very powerful step.
So, excuse me. So, using the little wearables as a red flag, and then if you look like something's showing up, you go into the doctor, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a classic one would be that many people hit 40, they feel more anxious, they're not sleeping so well, they're putting on weight centrally, they're losing muscle mass, they're noticing these little changes. Maybe they're noticing them on their wearable, maybe they're noticing them in the mirror, maybe they're noticing them at night.
Well,
All
we're going to have to take a commercial break. Dr. Arasu and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What is functional medicine and how does it function? With us this hour discussing the benefits of functional medicine is Dr. Anu Arasu. Her website, londonbioidenticalhormones.com. So, Dr. Anasu, what is the difference between functional medicine and allopathic? We've talked about some of the differences, but say, for instance, do you need to be an MD before you go on become a functional medicine practitioner?
There are different functional medicine practitioners. Not all of them will be doctors. But a doctor that does functional medicine as well will be using both diet, lifestyle, supplements, personalized food plans, and prescribing where needed. So that could be bioidentical hormones, it could be medications. All of that toolkit would be available, and I think it's very nice for us to widen that lens of the tools that we have, because otherwise, if you just have a hammer and a nail, there's always a risk of just kind of banging on with that one approach. Whereas what you were saying so beautifully at the beginning of this interview was really about the power of looking at the body and its systems in a joined up manner.
So, one thing that I wonder is like you have your supplements. So, if you're going to supplement something, it's not going to work particularly unless you happen to be deficient in that thing, right? Where a drug is going to affect you one way, regardless. It's going to affect you, whether it's the right effect or not. We don't know. Do you suggest starting out gentle, like with supplements and herbs and lifestyle changes, and then bringing out the big guns when if that doesn't work?
It's all about finding what's right for that person at that time, I believe. And many people, I think, have an idea of what they do or don't want before they know what the problem is. So I think the key thing is really to first of all identify what's going on, And then absolutely, the idea is always to just give the body what it needs to do that in the most natural, non-invasive way as possible. And ideally, I like to use the raw material. So the idea is that when you're prescribing vitamins, for example, something the body makes, or when we're giving hormones, we use bioidentical hormones, which are identical in structure to the body's own. So the body knows how to metabolize it. So that's a very powerful starting place, as opposed to drugs, which are not found, they're not molecules found naturally in the body. So they're having an impact perhaps on a receptor, but then having other impacts in the body as well. And that's one of the big, big problems we see with polypharmacy. And it's a huge cause of death. If people are on a whole list of meds, it's just a huge, huge cause of death in the older population.
So, when you mentioned several times bioidentical hormones, how do those differ from your basic hormones that you get you normally get at a doctor's office?
Yeah. So hormones is a really important topic for general health. We have anabolic hormones when we're younger, which build us up. We can slip into a state of catabolism as we get older, where we lose muscle mass, we get more frail, and we can start to decline. Unfortunately, the mainstream paradigm tends to think of hormonal problems, as kind of quite a binary way. For women, it's like you're in menopause or you're not. And if you're not in menopause, it's all about fertility. So you can have a contraceptive. Whatever problem you have, take a contraceptive. The reality is that, our hormones can get out of balance at any time. If we have polycystic ovarian syndrome and we're not ovulating, we're not going to produce progesterone. But rather than thinking, well, actually, perhaps this person needs progesterone and giving a bioidentical progesterone, all too often, they're given the pill. Contraceptive pill suppresses the ovaries, floods the body with fake hormones, causes other side effects. And the person may not have even wanted contraception, right? So I think that premenopausal women get quite a raw deal because the physiology, the natural state of hormones and balance is not being looked at. Then in menopause, there's also this problem because there are bioidentical hormone replacement and synthetic hormone-like drugs given as replacement. And even though the difference is known, it's mentioned in the guidelines, that bioidentical hormones are safer because the body knows how to metabolize them, whereas synthetic hormone-like drugs, they cause cardiovascular problems, increased risk of clots, breast cancer. We don't see the same effects with bioidentical hormones. And yet many women aren't being told the difference. They're just given hormone replacement therapy without any distinction between these two types being made. So that's
So, what is a bioidentical hormone?
so a
what's the-
bioidentical hormone, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, is a hormone that is identical in structure to our body's own, as opposed to a synthetic progestin like medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is not identical in structure to the body's own progesterone. So as well as binding to the progesterone receptor, it goes and binds to other steroid receptors and causes unwanted effects. That is the difference. It's literally the molecule. Bioidentical hormones, identical to the body's own. Synthetic hormone-like drugs, not identical to the body's own. That's the difference.
What about the cycles? Obviously, women and men are governed by the moon, if you will, as far as how our hormones dance with each other. When you're taking bioidentical hormones, is that taken into consideration?
I mean, bioidentical hormones or hormones would be given cyclically for women who are having cycles. I think people's sensitivities vary a lot. People, in terms of how in tune people are, what they feel, what kind of doses they need. And this is why I'm such a big fan of individualizing the dose. Some people are very sensitive, very in tune, very responsive to very small doses. And that is a very different situation from someone else who's having many strong symptoms and is not, just not feeling any benefit or not having any of the edge taken off with a lower dose. So I think you just have to, it's really about working with the individual in front of you.
And from what I've seen, at least in this country, the insurance companies run everything. You have to have a diagnosis, and everybody's treated the same. There's no individualization, and people are suffering for it. What is the pathway out of that?
I hope that the future holds it. I hope that AI is going to allow us to collate huge amounts of data and see patterns. And there will be many, many new ways for people to take preventative health into their hands and move towards a model of health rather than healthcare. I do believe that will happen, but I do unfortunately think that it's going to be on the responsibility of the individuals. It's going to be, and that's why things like this podcast is so important, because I think it's so much about people taking control of their own health. Yeah, that's the shift.
So, if we eventually get the power back in our hands, do you see the medical system going through a drastic change?
I certainly see the medical system going through a drastic change. I think it would be great if the medical system is reserved for acute care, emergencies, appendicitis. You go in, that needs to be dealt with. And that many of the preventable diseases, most of our chronic killers, cardiovascular disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, many of these things can be, prevented, certainly delayed. And this is all going to happen. This should all be happening. So this is what I want to create, a society where we are actually preventing these things from happening.
So I have to bring up the fly in the ointment here. As we're hoping to become more and more healthy, our environment is becoming increasingly toxic. How much does toxicity, the role, play in a health decline?
Interesting question. It is a big factor. I do believe the human body is incredibly resilient, and I believe that if we get our metabolic health sorted, we are in a very good stead. Now, we can deal with toxicity. For example, I was just reading a study yesterday about Finnish saunas and the benefits of having a traditional sauna, or actually, I think in the study it was really any sauna, 3 to 7 times a week. That's quite a lot. But these traditional methods of detoxifying.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's been around for how long, and we kind of lost track of it, and now we're dying in our own soup of toxicity.
But rather than it having to be too complicated, rather than us necessarily, and sometimes, of course, there will be complex cases where people do need to have tests and they do need to, dive deep into the biochemistry. As a general, there are many things that we can do on a general basis to keep ourselves healthy. Exercise, anything that where we're going to be sweating. If you imagine anything where we're excreting is getting rid of toxicity, and things like doing regular saunas, we can counteract the toxicity. So what I'm more worried about, in a way, because the toxicity is in part out of our control, and there are certain regular practices we can do, what I think we need to really focus on is the metabolic health, right? Because the stress, the sugar, the sleep, this stuff is really within our control and makes a huge difference.
Doesn't the plastics in our food, in our milk, doesn't that impact hormonal imbalances for even young children?
It does. Yes, it does. I mean, we've seen a lot of shifts happening in terms of the ages in which people are going through puberty, sperm counts. We are seeing many phenomena. I would say that when it comes to hormones, it's first of all healthy to sort of understand this normal physiology that I was talking about, this idea that hormone imbalances can happen at any age, right? Can be diet, can be genetics, can be toxicity. All of these things can contribute to a hormone imbalance. So if you have a hormonal problem in your younger years, it's worth going and seeing a functional medicine, bioidentical hormone doctor, because you're right. All of these things can affect our hormone balance, basically. Yeah.
And avoidance is probably a good thing too with some of them. So it's that time for us to take a station break. Dr. Arasu and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How are your hormones? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing hormones is Dr. Anu Arasu. Her website, londonbioidenticalhormones.com. Dr. Arasu, I think probably as a culture, or just you general lay people, wherever, probably don't really understand how important our hormones are to our health. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, our hormones govern just about everything. Um, I can't really emphasize how important our hormones are. But if we imagine that even our most basic survival response, fight or flight, is governed by our hormones, that's a good starting place. Now, one of the things that can happen is that our body is wired to protect us. And in the acute situation, stress hormones can fire up, and that can be super useful. If stress becomes chronic, it depends on the individual's wiring, their nervous system, their own hormonal blueprint as to how that affects them. Stress itself is not inherently bad, but if someone has a certain predisposition, having their stress hormones firing all the time can cause a number of problems. And to give you an example just how big this is, the kind of problems we're thinking about, it's going to affect your gut. It's going to affect your ability to digest the most basic nutrients, the building blocks that you need to make everything, to digest your food, to make your cells. It's going to cause widespread inflammation throughout the body, which is linked to just about all the big killers. It's going to affect your brain function. So now you begin to see how stress hormones, if they're switched on for too long, if the individual has that kind of predisposition, suddenly they're affecting the gut, they're affecting the immune system, they're affecting your ability to recover from pretty much any illness. They're also going to have an impact on our sex hormones, which are key for the heart, the brain, and the bones. So we start to see how hormones not only govern the most basic survival mechanisms, but they also, if they go wrong, filter out to psychology, to our brain function, to our cardiovascular function, to our immune system, to our inflammation levels.
Which has me thinking that our environment and our situation right now as a culture is feeding into this fight or flight being kind of turned on all the time, and us not being able to kick back and digest and relax. PTSD runs rampant. People have been in a car accident. Just driving then becomes so stressful for them. Um, would you say that we are actually, as a culture, in fight or flight more than than this? What is healthy?
I think it's as a society, we probably can see that our society is not as healthy as it could be, to say the greatest understatement of all time. But I think what's more interesting is physiological diversity. Why is it the case that two people can have the same experience, but they have different responses? Because this is the part that has been largely ignored by mainstream medicine. We look at the outside world, but we don't look inwards. And what functional medicine and what we're talking about, even with personalized medicine, is looking at the outside world and looking inwards, looking at the interface between the two. So yes, we live in a stressful environment. We do live in a stress toxic world, toxic soup. But how our physiology copes with that and how we can upgrade our software to cope with that is very interesting. Only something like 5% of genes are fully penetrant, by which I mean, 100% cause a condition. So what we know now is that actually it's just software, and there's so much that we can do to affect how that runs. And the possibilities range from the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. There is so much that we can do, positively to thrive even in this toxic soup. And that's the kind of positive note that I would want people to take away from this.
So I know very many times I've been in a situation and I'm right next to somebody. We're both in the same situation, and they're going off. It's the end of the world. I'm thinking, what are you going to do when something real happens? The people that are wired like that, is that genetic, or is that the way they approach life? Was it learned in childhood? What makes people more resilient than others?
Well, we're still learning that, but for sure there are some nervous system parameters, autonomic nervous system parameters, that are probably fairly stable. So we have a diversity in terms of how fast our nerve systems tire, basically. Some people might be very fast, they might be quick thinkers, they may be impulsive, they may have quick reaction speed, they may be, coming up with ideas like this, they may tire faster. All of this is fine. It's actually knowing that allows us to then adapt our environment accordingly. On the other hand, we could have been worn down by life. So many people, if they've had stress, their mitochondria may now be in a kind of a cell danger response. Their hormones, their adrenal hormones may be, they tired and wired. They may be high at the wrong time of the day, low at other times of the day. That may be affecting their blood sugar. So if they're in this kind of pattern, and that's why their nervous system is malfunctioning, this is very fixable. So it's all about really just digging a bit deeper and and looking at all of those dimensions of health: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, I would say.
So, what are some of the signs for both men and women that they're suffering from hormonal imbalances?
Fatigue, mood swings. It could be memory issues. Many people come and say, "Look, I feel like I've got dementia. I can't remember names. I can't remember faces. I walk into a room, I forgot what I've left there." Um, yeah, energy one is a big one. Libido, obviously, that can be one of the first things to go because it's kind of protective. If your body's stressed, the last thing you want to do is be fertile or have a child. It could be insomnia. It could be problems with thermoregulation. It could be weight gain or weight loss. It could be thinning bones, loss of muscle mass, loss of hair, brittle nails. And then there's a whole host of less well-known symptoms. Even things like arthritis, inflammation, it could all be hormonal. So often, many vague symptoms that seem unrelated are actually related. And often there can be an underlying hormonal imbalance.
Well, there's so many hormones. It's not that is not surprising. And the
Yeah.
further we get away from the way Mother Nature intended things, the more likely we are to be imbalanced, aren't we? So, if you're wanting to take, the control of your hormones, and you feel like maybe this is a hormonal imbalance, and so I come to you, I say, "Hey, I've got these symptoms. What kind of tests do you do?"
We use things like blood tests, urine tests, that look at it depends really what kind of parameters you're wanting to look at, but blood tests will be looking at hormone levels and things like also FSH, so the pituitary hormone. Urine tests will also give you information about how hormones are metabolized. Um, and tests, yes, they're a snapshot, but they're very, very useful. And I'll give you an example. Imagine a woman's in perimenopause and she's told, well, you're over 45, you don't need a test. Well, she's told that because it's kind of assumed that she's in perimenopause. She can just try some hormones. The problem with that attitude is that she may have loads of estrogen. And then if you're not testing her hormones and you're just giving her what you would give a menopausal woman, which is what we see all the time happening, it's too much. She can put on weight, she can get constipated, headaches, get quite a lot of quite bad side effects because she actually wasn't there yet. She didn't need that much. So the idea is that it's a journey. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. We don't just go one day from being absolutely fine to being in menopause. It's a gradual journey. And at each stage of that, people need different things. So it's really about identifying what that person needs at that time. And that's why I think testing is very important. But often it's dismissed by the mainstream system because it doesn't change management because they're anyway just going to get a kind of standard.
Treat you like everybody's the same.
Yeah.
So, within the tests, are they kind of what I would call gross? Okay, in other words, their parameters of what they consider normal are kind of long on either end.
It's a good question. This is a particularly relevant question for things like the thyroid,
Hmm.
um, whereby the range is considered quite wide. And you'll be told, TSH of 4, you can be told by mainstream medicine, is fine. If you were pregnant, it would not be fine. If you were trying to fall pregnant, they'd say, no, you have to have a TSH below 2 because otherwise your brain is working too hard. And actually, if you had this TSH at the upper end of normal, it's not so good for your baby's IQ. Okay, but then how come it's fine for a woman that's not pregnant? So this is a bit sneaky. And also, classically with the thyroid, there's also something called subclinical hypothyroidism, which is TSH between 4 and 10, which is crazy, where people are not being told, you really need to take treatment. They're saying, oh, you can watch and wait. And actually, there is evidence showing that that's linked to worse cardiovascular outcomes, put strain on the heart to have a high TSH. So I think classically thyroid hormone disorders have been the one area where, results have been dismissed as normal when they have been very, pushing it.
Pushing the edge of the
By any
envelope there.
stretch of the imagination. And people really, really feel it. So that's why you really need to, I think that's why it's so important that practitioners are actually treating the person in front of them.
Instead of the general consensus of what's normal.
And this idea that, the guidelines are gospel in that way, it's not the case. It can take very long time for things to actually reach the guidance. And in the meantime, there are real people to be treated.
Well, it is time for us to take another station break. Please stay with us as Dr. ARASU and I continue to explore holistic approach to healthcare. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are ancient forms useful in healthcare today? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Anu Arasu. Her website, londonbioidenticalhormones.com. Dr. Arasu, what about the old ways? You mentioned saunas. Have we thrown out the baby with the bathwater when we decided to go to modern medicine?
I think people are beginning to come to recognize the value of some of the old practices, with all the noise that we have in the world. But you're right, it's a slow pickup. Things like saunas, there's a big lack, and it's it's a profound technique that we see across many cultures. The idea of using hot and cold therapies to get physiological effects. I think we need to. But there's a lot of mistrust nowadays. And I almost think that we need to come back to things via the science. I imagine that we may end up going full circle and rediscovering some older practices, but we almost need to understand why at this stage to fully embrace something. That's the feeling.
One of the things that I've seen and experienced is, say, for instance, herbs. Okay, there will be some self-proclaimed herbologists because it's not regulated that decide that they're an herbologist just because they want to be, and start taking in a client load, and at very least they don't help, and in some cases they certainly do harm. Do you think that this is added to the distrust, and what would you suggest about that?
I think what has added to the mistrust or distrust, so many factors. It can come from both sides, regulated or unregulated. In the set, just what we were talking about before, that if we have too binary approach, you've got this disease or you're fine, and people know they're not fine. That the lack of space for the complexity, people can feel that there's something wrong, but it's not being matched. with what they're being told on the outer world. And already that starts to brew something. And then in time they realize, okay. And then finally they get the diagnosis. And all this time they know that they were brewing something. And then they look back and say, well, hang on. I don't trust this because I knew that there was something wrong before. That can be one reason for distrust. Then the example that you gave. And really, what is the solution to that? I think the solution is kind of the dig deep. It's going back to the awareness, to going back into our body awareness. We do have to partner with experts. I think that is very helpful, because I think if we try to walk this path alone, we can focus on the wrong thing. And ultimately experts do know the pitfalls, and they can exclude, they have a pyramid of importance, and they can put things into a framework. But I think that what creates the trust is that when we feel into our own bodies and we are walking that path of awareness, we're tracking ourselves, we're watching ourselves, we're seeing how we respond, like we have a little laboratory. This is being the laboratory, not that we have to go and spend our lives in a laboratory, but this being the laboratory. If we take that approach, I think that builds trust. I don't know any other way to build back trust.
And there seems to be a lot of broken trust. And as the medical system gets more and more challenged because the insurance companies took over in this country, and it became a money-making thing for the big pharma and for insurance companies, and the poor doctors are trying, but their hands are tied. And I think that's really destroyed a lot of trust. I don't know if you have the same situation going on in the UK, but this whole situation in the United States tends to make the treating everybody like a number, like a diagnostic number. You have to pigeonhole them. And so much is slipping between the cracks. And people, like you say, they're feeling, I know something's wrong, but nobody can find it. I know it's here, but nobody can find it. How can we change the system, or can we even change the system, um, to empower the individual versus line the pockets of the companies?
I think it needs radical honesty. I think we need to accept that actually our healthcare system right now is a reactive model that treats disease. And that if we want to be proactive and do preventative healthcare, that has to be coming from us, self-funded, the individual taking responsibility, going on that path. I think that's one thing, and I don't think that's said enough. I think it's we need to be making that distinction between healthcare and health, which is so much more. And I think that, the power and the responsibility go together, really. And we can be responsible without blaming ourselves. This is the other thing, separating out responsibility and blame. I've done many things, wrong health things for myself. Back in the 80s, you used to think cereal was good for you. When we were growing up, we watched the adverts on TV, and you look back, okay, I didn't know then, now I know. So it's really about finding a way to be light with it, to become more aware, to become more curious about our bodies, to take responsibility, not to shift into self-blame, but kind of recognize that the preventative health and not only health, but flourishing and optimal health and higher consciousness, that is all, we should all be taking that, I think, into our personal responsibility.
And, once again, most of the ancient forms for evolution, for spiritual evolution, involved watching one's diet,
Yeah,
fasting, cleansing, all that fun stuff. It's gone full circle. And
yeah.
I often see, we all see it. You say, well, this is going on, and you're not getting any answers from the mainstream. Why don't you go to a functional medicine? My insurance company won't pay for it. That's the victim stance. And I think a lot of us are in victim at this point. Do you see a future where insurance company will cover the alternatives, or do you see a future where the current system just shatters?
I see a positive future. Maybe I'm hopeful, right? But there are there are very positive possibilities with the most amazing AI, the most amazing technology coming out that allows people to track and to find out and to collect data that would never have been able to collect before. I think this idea of, my insurance won't cover it, therefore I won't do it. Again, it comes down to a question of what do you value? And, we always have to come back to that question. What do we value? Um, it's a journey, it's a learning, it's like an onion, layers and layers of learning about oneself. And if one values that, I think there are very, very deep rewards to be found. Um, yeah, that's really the most important thing.
So it's that time in the show, Dr. Arasu, when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
My mission is to contribute to a a greater flourishing of human consciousness. That would be the dream.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. And wait, human consciousness takes the back burner when we're physically ill and not going to live long, doesn't it?
They're completely inseparable. We I think really there are these 4 dimensions: the physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual. Even that's a massive oversimplification of what I've just said. But if we try to frame these things, and really pay attention to each of them, I mean, the physical, if we start to think of ourselves as, think of the systems joined up, think of how we need to have the basic building blocks in order to, have our vitamins, have our bile acids working, have our gut healthy in order for the rest of the processes to work. With the emotional side, yes, we know from research, adverse childhood episodes research, how big a factor that plays in all-cause morbidity and mortality. It's crazy. If we look at the mental side, there's even research showing how the power of our thoughts affects our physiology, whether that be the placebo effect, whether that be, there was research in 2018 looking at telling people that they had an obesity gene, or telling people they had a protective gene against obesity, and that was it. And how just hearing that, their fullness levels increased by 2.5 times. The amazing positive effect, whereas people that were told that they didn't have this protective gene, they had no bad effect. They just had the same as before. We see the research showing the power of our beliefs. And then at the spiritual level, if we've gone against our basic nature, if we're stuck in that wrong relationship, that wrong job, okay, it does take its toll. It's going to take time to fix. In the meantime, we may need to be looking at all of the other areas as well. But trying to do these things in tandem is so, so important.
And there's a lot of them. You have to dig pretty deep to find them, don't you? The modalities that will treat on the spiritual level, say for instance.
It's yes. But I think that as soon as one's aware of something, it's already half the battle. Because one thing that happens is that, you, and this I think we all find with time, isn't it? You stop jumping into the wrong things, if nothing else. I mean, at the most basic level, if you swum against your basic nature, you've ended up somewhere you really don't want to be. At a certain point, whether it's burnout, whether it's complete autonomic nervous system dysfunction, whether it's age, whether it's, a buildup of toxins and tired mitochondria, or whether it's, just a bit more awareness, you kind of stop and think a little bit more.
Well, unfortunately, Dr. Arsu, we're out of time. Thank you so, so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Anu Arasu. Dr. Arasu is the founder of London Bioidentical Hormones, and she's trained with the Institute for Functional Medicine and the British Society of Ecological Medicine. She holds diplomas in child health, obstetrics, gynecology, sexual and reproductive health. To find out more about Dr. Anasu and all she has to offer, visit her website, londonbioidenticalhormones.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to visit our past archived episodes, visit missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join me right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.